Dependency inversion. To understand the dependency inversion, first we need to understand what is dependency injection. Let's understand that with example. So let's say, let me go to solids directory where we were working before, right? And today I'll be using PHP. Okay, so it's anyways language agnostic, any language you can use which uses the OOPS concepts, right? Now let's say we have a class called area calculator. Please bear with me for 2 minutes. I'll just use the same example and then I'll go with the real world example. Okay, so now let's say we have a constructor method. Okay, right? And then inside this constructor we are just passing, let's say, square, right? And then that is square, and maybe simply we are just creating a public property square, right? And then here this square is equal to square. I could have used a snippet for this, but yeah, fine. Now let's create a class called square, right? And basically that, right? Now maybe you can have some public function area, right? And then basically you have some return some value, or let's say just echo 100. Okay, PHP EOL. Okay, right? Now what you will do is you will create a variable called area calculator, right? And that you'll create a new object of area calculator, right? And then here you will just pass this new square, right? The object of the new square, right? And basically off of that you can just execute this area method from this area calculator, right? So then you have this area calculator. From there you can access this square property, and from there you can actually access this area method, right? And if I run it, so sure enough, whatever we are returning here, that. So in this example, right, so here you observe, right, so we are passing this new square as a constructor argument, right? So this is called as dependency, and right, and this dependency is injected inside this area calculator class, right? Argument, or maybe we can have this method where we will inject some other object as well. Maybe this area method is completely part of this, right? And here basically you are just passing this square $square, right? And then in this area method you are just you can directly pass this square, something like that, right? So that is basically a dependency injection. Okay, now since you understand the dependency injection, let me tell you a simple example and benefits, and like it has some benefits, right? So let me show you the benefits quickly, and then we'll move to the original solid principle, right? So I have this project called Q&A Inlight. Let's open VS Code. Okay, so now this is quite old project which I worked on. So it has a lot of things, right? So let's go to the thread controller. Thread controller and this store method. We are injecting this request object and we are injecting this reCAPTCHA as well, right? reCAPTCHA is the rule which I created, right? So basically I'm doing some validation, creating the thread, and then if it is expecting this API is expecting this JSON format, then I'll just return the JSON formatted value, a JSON value. Otherwise I'll just redact to the thread path, right? Basically that is that, right? The benefit of doing the dependency injection is while doing the test, right, we can change these dependencies or we can mock these dependencies, right? So if I go to create thread test, right, so here if you see in the setup method, you don't need to learn PHP, right, to understand this. Just understand these concepts. So in this create threads test, right, I'm doing a mock, right? Whenever this reCAPTCHA.class is required and whenever we are calling this passes method, right, I'll show you in the split, right, what is that. So if we go to this passes, right, so here I have these passes, right? Whenever I'm calling this passes method inside the code, just simply return true, right? Don't run this code, right? And it is actually helpful when I'm calling the third party. If you see here, I'm just calling this reCAPTCHA website, right, with some credentials, and then based on that I'm just checking that reCAPTCHA, whatever the user has given the inputs, right, based on that it is successful or not. It just simply returns true and false, and based on that I'm allowing user to create the thread, right? So it is actually helpful when we are doing testing. So imagine we have like this project has a lot of tests, right? Maybe 400 500 tests, right? And in the 400 500 tests, whenever I'm creating a thread, right, I don't want to call this API, right, actually in the test, because it's not required, right? I'm not taking ownership of this API, right? It should work as expected, right? So in the test cases, I can simply mock this reCAPTCHA, and then based on that, I can simply just check or run my test, right? So this is how we can use the dependency injection, right? The benefit to it is we can mock dependencies easily. This is dependency injection. Now let's talk about dependency inversion. Let me close this. Let's go to misohub.com again, right? Now in the pricing section, right? So if I go to the pricing section, you will see that we have these pricing sections, right? $0 or $5 or $15, right? So be a case where user is from some other country, right? Where this payment gateway, what we have implemented, right? That won't work. Or maybe there are a couple of options, right? So if I click on this subscribe now, there will be a couple of options given, right? Which will show me pay by UPI, pay by credit card, debit card. This can be different, right? So now this different payment gateway integration, how we will do, right? So let's try to simulate that code. Okay, so let's go to solids again, and let's open this example file again. Let's remove this code. Okay, so let's say there is a class, right? This will be all pseudocode, but you'll get the idea, right? So let's say payments controller. Yeah, let's call payment controller. Okay, and then you will have this public function called charge, right? And then basically you will have, let's say you have I work in PayPal, right? So let's use that same thing. Let's say I have PayPal integration, PayPal payment gateway, something like that, right? And then maybe here I'll have public charge method. I have a word function thing, and then here basically I'll just do charge user, something like that, right? And then let's call this payment controller let's say store. Okay, so let's call it store. Or let's say create. I don't know naming is correct or not, but yeah, let's go with create. Okay, now what I want to do is I want to charge the user, right? So what I can do is I can call this payment gateway. I can pass this payment gateway here, right? And then I can have gateway, and based on this, right, I can just call gateway, and then I can just call the charge method, right? Whenever we will call this payment controller create method, we will inject this PayPal payment gateway, right? And we will charge this, right? So since we want to allow user to change these payment gateways on the runtime, right? So what we can do? So simply what we can do is we can create an interface. So let's have a gateway, right? And which will have an abstract method called charge, right? Right, and then this PayPal gateway implements this gateway. Now, because I'm already implementing this, right, gateway, so instead of passing dependency as this class, what I'll do is I'll just change it to interface, right? So now what will happen is tomorrow if I add, let's call it Stripe, right? And tomorrow let's say we have Stripe payment gateway integration, right? So on the runtime I can inject here Stripe payment gateway, and then I can charge user, right? I don't have to change any code, and on the runtime I have ability to inject any different object. So whenever you inject any interface, basically that is, in simple words, dependency inversion. Simple, right? First you understand dependency injection. Dependency injection is nothing but whenever we are injecting any classes or objects inside any method or constructor method, right? So that is dependency injection. The benefit to it is we can have we can mock things in the test, right? And on the fly we can change the dependencies, right? So that is one benefit to it. Now whenever we are injecting any interface, basically that is dependency inversion. Dependency injection and inversion, simple is that, right? People get confused in between both, so that is why I wanted to show you in this way, right? And that's it. So simple. See you in the next one.